Welcome to the Joy of Architecture. We're diving deep today into a topic that's really front and center for anyone building modern software. Security patterns in cloud-native and microservices architectures.
That's right. It's crucial stuff. As organizations embrace the agility and, the scalability of the cloud and break down applications into these smaller distributed services, well, the traditional security model just doesn't hold up anymore.
Yeah, that old castle and moat idea, where you had this strong perimeter keeping everything supposedly safe inside.
Exactly. It's just not relevant when your applications are everywhere, accessed by users everywhere, and talking to countless other services, APIs. The boundary is gone.
Absolutely. And the attack surface just explodes, doesn't it? Plus, honestly, threats are getting more sophisticated all the time. The sources we looked at for this deep dive, they provide a fantastic analysis of the security strategies designed specifically for this new world.
Patterns really built to create resilient systems, even in these highly distributed, dynamic environments.
So our goal today is to cut through the noise, distill the most important insights from these sources, and figure out what's truly critical for you to understand about securing these modern architectures.
Yeah, we're going to unpack some foundational strategies, things like zero trust architecture and defense in depth, and really look at how identity becomes, well, absolutely central.
Okay, sounds good. Let's jump right in with what's arguably the most influential security model shaping the conversation today. Zero Trust Architecture, or ZPA.
Right, ZTA, it's built on a really simple but kind of radical principle. Never trust, always verify.
Never trust, always verify. That feels so different from how things used to work,
Yeah.
Where if you were inside the network, you were mostly trusted.
Exactly. That's the core shift. The explicit assumption in ZTA is that nothing is inherently trustworthy. Not users, not devices, not even segments of your internal network.
Wow, okay.
So every single request for access to a resource, whether it's from someone in the office, a remote worker, or, importantly, one service talking to another, it must be verified based on context. It's a complete departure from that perimeter thinking.
And that's why it's so critical today, right? Because with cloud, multi-cloud, remote work, there is no single perimeter anymore. Your resources and users are scattered.
Precisely. ZTA is essential for securing that distributed IT landscape where, frankly, implicit trust is just a massive security gap waiting to be exploited.
Okay, so what does verify actually mean here? What are the core ideas?
Well, the NIST standard, SP 800-207, lays out the core principles. One is verify explicitly.
Verify explicitly.
Yeah. This means authentication and authorization aren't just a one-time check at the gate. They happen continuously, and they're based on all the available data points for every single access request.
Like what kind of data points?
Things like, who is the user? What's the health of their device? Is it patched? Is it compromised? Where are they located? What service are they trying to access? And what's the sensitivity of the data they're trying to reach? All of that context matters.
Okay, so it's way beyond just can this user log in? It's more like, should this specific user on this specific device from this specific location be allowed to access this tiny piece of data right now, given everything we currently know?
You got it. That's the level of granularity. The second principle is use least privilege.
Least privilege, always a good idea.
Always. But ZTA makes it non-negotiable. Even after you've verified someone or something, you limit their access rights to the absolute bare minimum necessary to perform the specific task at hand.
And only for as long as needed.
Exactly. That's where things like just-in-time or JIT access granting permissions only when needed for a short duration and just enough access, JEA making sure permissions are super precisely scoped come in. This massively reduces the potential damage, the blast radius, if an account does get compromised.
Okay, makes sense. Verify explicitly. Least privilege. Well, what's the third one?
The third one is a real mindset shift. Assume breach.
Assume breach. That sounds pessimistic.
Slight chuckle.
Yeah.
Maybe, but it's realistic. It means you operate under the assumption that attackers could already be inside your environment, or that a breach of some part of your system is basically inevitable.
So the focus shifts.
Right. It shifts from only trying to prevent that initial intrusion to also prioritizing rapid detection, containment, and fixing things within the environment. You assume attackers will try to move laterally from one system to another.
So you design controls to stop that lateral movement, like microsegmentation.
Exactly like microsegmentation. You break things down so even if they compromise one service, they can't easily hop over to others. You also verify encryption everywhere, even between internal services. And you rely heavily on analytics for continuous monitoring to spot suspicious activity fast.
Okay, the core idea is definitely clicking. No implicit trust, constant verification based on context, minimum necessary access, and always assume you might already be compromised. So what are the big wins and the big challenges?
Well, the biggest benefit is obviously significantly enhanced security. By killing implicit trust and forcing continuous verification, you shrink the attack surface massively and make it way harder for attackers to move around if they do get in.
So better protection against data breaches and those nasty advanced persistent threats.
Definitely. You also gain much increased visibility because every access attempt is logged and evaluated. And as we said, it's built for modern IT cloud, microservices, remote work, all that.
Right. It fits the way we work now.
Absolutely. Plus, ZTA aligns really well with many compliance standards. Think PCI, DSS, HPAA, GDPR, because it mandates strong authentication, least privilege, and detailed auditing.
Okay, sounds great. But on the flip side, this sounds really complicated to actually implement. What are the trade-offs?
Complexity is the big one, no doubt. ZTA isn't a single product you just buy and install. It's a strategy. It requires changes across your tech stack, your processes, and honestly, your organizational culture.
Our culture shift away from that internal trust model.
Exactly. Implementing and managing all those granular policies can be really complex. There can be performance implications too. All that verification takes time, right? So latency can be a concern. And it requires significant investment in the right tools and training your people. And then there's dealing with legacy systems. That can be a real headache.
I can imagine. Trying to bolt this onto old applications that were never designed for it.
Yeah, it often requires phased rollouts, maybe some clever workarounds. It's definitely a journey, not flipping a switch. There can also be some initial user experience friction if those verification steps feel too intrusive, although things like adaptive MFA can help smooth that out.
Okay, so how does this actually look in practice when you're using, say, AWS or Azure or GCP? Do they just give you a ZTA button?
Facults. Wouldn't that be nice? No, not quite. They provide the essential building blocks, but you have to architect and orchestrate them into a coherent ZTA strategy.
So what are some of those blocks?
Okay, so on AWS, you'd heavily use IAM for identities and permissions, VPCs and security groups for network segmentation, maybe AWS verified access for securing application access without a VPN. And then services like CloudTrail and GuardDuty are critical for that continuous monitoring piece.
Right. Monitoring is key for assume breach.
Absolutely. In Azure, Microsoft Entra ID is really foundational. It handles the authentication and authorization, and its conditional access policies are the core engine for that explicit verification based on context, device, health, location, risk score, etc. Then you use Azure VNets and network security groups for segmentation, and Azure Defender for cloud for threat protection.
And Google Cloud, they had that Beyond Corp thing early on, didn't they?
They did, and it heavily influences their approach. You use Cloud IAM for permissions, VPCs, and firewall rules for the network side. But a key piece for application access, especially in that Beyond Core style, is the Identity-Aware Proxy, IAP. It acts as that gatekeeper, verifying identity and context before letting anyone near your application.
Got it. So the cloud providers give you the tools, but you're the architect putting them together.
Yeah.
What about securing the communication between all those microservices? That seems like a huge internal attack surface.
It absolutely is. And that's where service meshes like Istio or Linkerd become incredibly important for ZTA in a microservices world.
How so?
They can automatically enforce mutual TLS, MTLS, between services. So services encrypt traffic between them and they authenticate each other. No imposters allowed. Plus, SOTUS meshes allow for really fine-grained authorization policies at the service level. So service A can call this specific function on service B, but not that one. That's essential ZTA capability right down in the weeds of your application.
Okay, so you're combining cloud provider services and things like service meshes to build these layers of verification. Can you maybe walk us through a simplified picture of how an access request might flow in a ZTA world, just conceptually?
Sure. Okay, imagine this. Someone could be a user, could be another automated service, tries to access something, some resource. A gatekeeper, let's call it a policy enforcement point or PE, intercepts that request.
Okay, a bouncer.
Kind of, yeah, but this bouncer doesn't just look at where the request came from, like the IP address. It calls back to a policy engine or policy decision point. It asks, okay, who is this really? What's their identity? What do we know about their device? Is it healthy? Where are they? What specific thing are they trying to access?
So it gathers all that context we talked about.
Right. The policy engine pulls in all that context, compares it against the rules you've defined your ZTA policies, and makes a decision. Allow, deny, maybe allow, but only if they pass an MFA challenge.
But
Then the policy engine tells the gatekeeper, the PP, the decision. The PP enforces it, lets the request through, or blocks it. And crucially, everything gets logged. Every request, every context point, every decision.
that clear flow based on verified identity and context, not just network location, that really is the core shift.
Okay,
What about the day-to-day reality? What are the big operational hurdles when you're actually running a ZTA environment?
well, continuous policy management is huge. Defining and, more importantly, maintaining policies that accurately reflect who needs access to what, why, and under what conditions is complex, and it's never finished. Policies get stale. Needs change.
Beats constant gardening.
Exactly. Identity and device management are also absolutely critical. You need strong multi-factor authentication, ideally everywhere, and you need ways to continuously assess the security posture of devices requesting access. Is that laptop patched? Does it have malware? You also need really robust monitoring, logging, and analytics. Remember, assume breach. You absolutely need the visibility and the tools, think CM, SOAR, to detect suspicious patterns and potential compromises rapidly across this distributed environment.
Because the attackers might already be inside.
Precisely. And yeah, as we touched on, dealing with legacy systems that weren't built for this and ensuring you have the skilled workforce, people who understand identity, policy, cloud security, those are significant operational challenges.
It really sounds like a continuous program, not just a one-off project.
Oh, yeah.
So boiling it down, what are the absolute must-do best practices and what are the worst mistakes people make?
Okay, best practices. Definitely start by defining your protect surface. Figure out what your most critical assets are, your crown jewel data, application services. Then map out your transaction flows. How do users and services actually interact with those critical assets?
Understand the pathways.
Exactly. Then architect inside out, focusing your strongest security controls closest to those critical assets first. Enforce strong, explicit authentication everywhere. MFA should be non-negotiable. Use granular least privilege, JEA. Implement microsegmentation to limit lateral movement. And establish continuous monitoring and validation. Automate everything you possibly can.
Start small and iterate.
Yes, absolutely. Don't try to boil the ocean. Start with a critical application or user group and focus on the user experience. Make it as smooth as possible.
Okay. And the pitfalls,
Yeah.
which we definitely not do.
Biggest pitfall. Treating ZTA as just a product you can buy off the shelf. It's a strategy and architecture. Also, that boil the ocean approach, trying to do everything at once, ignoring legacy systems or pretending they don't exist. Over-relying on network locations, still implicitly trusting things just because they're inside.
Right, falling back into old habits.
Yeah. Other big ones are incomplete asset discovery. You can't protect what you don't know you have. Weak device identity or health checks. Insufficient monitoring and logging. And crucially, neglecting the training and cultural shift needed. People need to understand why things are changing. And finally, don't just set and forget your policies. They need constant review and tuning.
And this isn't just theory, right? We're seeing real-world adoption. The U.S. federal government has a mandate, OMB M2209. Companies like Google really pioneered this with BeyondCorp.
Absolutely. Microsoft has adopted it internally and built a whole suite around it. Financial institutions, healthcare, retail, they're all moving this way, partly driven by compliance needs too. ZTA principles map really well to things like PCI DSS data segmentation, API access controls, and GDPR data minimization and audit trails.
So it's really becoming the standard for modern security design. Now, you mentioned ZTA tells you who can access what. What tells you how to build resilience everywhere else in the system?
That brings us nicely to the second foundational concept, defense in depth, or DIDI.
Defense in depth. That definitely sounds like layers. Like an onion
Yeah.
or a parfait.
Pickles. Exactly. Layers. It's a concept borrowed from military strategy, actually. Defense in depth means deploying multiple, redundant layers of security controls throughout your entire environment.
Redundant meaning different types of controls.
Ideally, yes. Different types, maybe even from different vendors. The core idea is simple. If one layer fails, and you should assume layers will fail eventually, another layer is there to slow down, prevent, or at least detect an attack and contain the impact. No single point of failure.
Okay, but how does this fit with cloud native and microservices? Doesn't it sound a bit like older security thinking? Stacking firewalls?
That's the key distinction. While the concept is old, its application in modern architectures is vital, and it strongly complements zero trust. Think of it this way. ZTA handles the explicit access decision should this user get to this data. DAID provides the resilience and mitigation across the whole path if that ZTA decision is somehow bypassed or a component along the way is compromised.
Okay, so they work together.
Very much so. For microservices, DD is absolutely essential. If one service gets breached, DD ensures that the service itself has internal defenses, and the services it talks to have defenses, and the network between them has defenses, all aimed at containing that breach's blast radius.
So ZTA might decide service A is allowed to talk to service B based on verified identity and context.
Right.
And then DD ensures that the connection between A and B is encrypted using MTLS, that service B validates all inputs rigorously, that the host or container running service B is hardened and scanned for vulnerabilities, that there's runtime protection,
Right.
all those layered controls.
Precisely. You're not relying on just one thing, the initial ZTA check, to be perfect. You're building resilience throughout the system. In cloud-native environments, a really helpful way to think about applying DD is the 4Cs model.
The 4Cs.
Yeah. Security layers applied at the cloud level, the underlying infrastructure provided by AWS, Azure, GCP, plus your account security settings. Then the cluster level, if you're using Kubernetes, securing the control plane, the nodes. Then the container level, securing the container images, the runtime environment. And finally, the code level, secure coding practices, dependency scanning within your application itself.
Cloud, cluster, container, code. That provides a nice structure for thinking about layers in a cloud environment. So what are the main benefits of doing DNID properly?
The biggest is definitely increased resilience. No single control failure leads to a total compromise. It significantly delays attackers, which gives your detection and response teams more time to react. It protects against a wider variety of threats, because different layers are often better suited to stopping different attack vectors. And it compensates for potential weaknesses in any individual control. Maybe your WAF isn't perfect, but your input validation catches something it missed.
Makes sense. More layers, more chances to stop something bad. What are the downsides? More complexity again.
Predictably, yes. Complexity and cost are big ones. You're managing multiple security tools, often from different vendors. You need people with diverse skills to manage them. Coordinating policies across all those layers can be really challenging.
Getting them to work together instead of fighting each other.
Right. There can also be performance overhead. Each layer might add a little bit of latency or resource consumption, and that can accumulate. Management and operational overhead is significant. Patching, updating, tuning all these different systems, and if you're not careful, you can end up with gaps or misconfigurations between the layers, which attackers can exploit.
We're just drowning in alerts from all these different systems. Alert fatigue.
Oh, yeah. Alert fatigue is a very real operational challenge with DD. You need good correlation and prioritization.
So how do we actually do DD in the cloud using native services? Can you map some examples to those layers?
Sure, so the cloud layer that's using the CSP's built-in security features, securing your account properly with strong IAM, using CSP services like AWS GuardDuty, Azure Defender for Cloud, or Google Security Command Center for broad threat detection.
Okay, leveraging the provider's security posture.
Exactly. Then the network layer, that's your VPCs or VNets, your security groups or network security groups, cloud-native firewalls, web application firewalls, WAFs, DDoS protection services.
Standard network controls, adapted for cloud.
Right. The host compute layer, or cluster container in a 4Cs, this involves things like vulnerability scanning on your virtual machines or container-based images, using tools like AWS Inspector, Azure Defender for Containers, Google Artifact Registry scanning, maybe endpoint detection and response, EDR agents, ensuring least privilege for compute workloads.
Securing the things that run the code.
Yep. Then the container layer specifically involves image scanning before deployment, runtime security tools that monitor container behavior, using container-specific network policies within something like Kubernetes, and assigning least privilege IAM roles directly to tasks or pods.
And the application layer.
That's things like your WAF again, security features in your ATI gateway, but also fundamental secure coding practices, input validation, output encoding, managing dependencies securely.
Stuff developers need to own.
Crucial. And the data layer focusing on encryption, both at rest, using services like KMS, Azure Key Vault, Google KMS, and storage encryption, and in transit, TLS everywhere, maybe data loss prevention, DLP tools. And underpinning all of this is monitoring and logging. You need comprehensive logging from all layers feeding into a central system, like a SIEM, for analysis and detection.
And the service mesh fits in here too.
Absolutely. A service mesh provides a key DLS specifically for that service-to-service communication. It enforces MTLS, encryption and authentication, provides fine-grained authorization, and gives you visibility into that internal traffic, all contributing to the layered defense within your application architecture.
Okay, you can almost visualize this, right? Like those classic diagrams of concentric circles with data at the core, and layers like application, host, network radiating outwards,
Yeah.
or maybe that 4Cs model stacked vertically.
Exactly. Those are good mental models. Concentric circles or stacked layers like cloud-cluster-container-code, or even visualizing it for microservices, edge security, service mesh, individual service hardening, data layer protections.
What are the operational headaches specifically tied to managing all these layers in DID?
Well, tool integration is often a big challenge. Getting logs and alerts from your firewall, your WAF, your EDR, your container runtime security tool, your cloud provider's detection service, getting all that into one place, like a SIM, and correlating it effectively, that's complex.
So you don't miss the bigger picture.
Right. Ensuring policy consistency across all these diverse tools is tough too. Is your network firewall policy aligned with your Kubernetes network policy?
Yeah.
Managing alert fatigue, as we mentioned, and prioritizing what really matters is a constant battle. And just the ongoing maintenance, patching, and testing of controls across all these different layers is a significant continuous burden.
That sounds exhausting.
Mhm.
Any critical best practices or common mistakes we should highlight for defense in depth?
Okay, best practices. Definitely take a risk-based approach. Focus your strongest, most expensive layers around your most critical assets. Don't try to apply maximum security equally everywhere.
Makes sense. Prioritize.
Use heterogeneous controls. Try not to rely entirely on tools from a single vendor if a vulnerability in their platform could compromise multiple layers. Variety is good.
Yeah.
And again, assume layers will be breached. This is where DID, and ZTA really complement each other beautifully. Designed for failure. Address the people, process, and technology aspects. DID isn't just tools. Implement segmentation both at the network level and microsegmentation between services. Enforce least privilege within each layer, not just at the entry point. And crucially, regularly test and validate your defenses. Don't just assume they work. Penetration testing, run breach and attack simulations. Automate testing where you can.
Test.
Always. As for pitfalls, the classic one is over-reliance on a single layer, especially the old network perimeter, thinking, we have a strong firewall, we're good. Also, a set-and-forget attitude towards controls. Complexity overwhelm, where the layers are so complicated and poorly integrated that they're actually ineffective.
More complex isn't always more secure.
Not at all. Ignoring the human factor, social engineering can often bypass many technical layers. Having a flat internal network with no segmentation is a huge risk. Poor configuration management leading to inconsistencies, not actually testing your incident response and recovery plans against failures in your layers, and just having a false sense of security because you have layers, but they're untested, misconfigured, or just plain ineffective.
Right, the illusion of security.
Right.
And DEG-OD is clearly fundamental to compliance, right? Like PCI DSS, HIPAA.
Yeah.
They basically mandate layered controls.
Absolutely. It's baked into almost every major security standard and regulation. They expect you to have controls at the network layer, host layer, application layer, data layer, plus administrative controls. It's foundational.
Okay, this is starting to form a clear picture. We have zero trust, setting the strategy never trust, always verify based on identity and context. And we have defense in depth, providing the layered, resilient implementation across the entire stack. How do they really fit together?
They are deeply complementary, They really reinforce each other to build effective modern security. ZTA provides the overarching strategy in the policy framework. It answers the who and what can be accessed under what conditions based on that explicit verification.
Okay, the access control brain.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
And Defense in Depth provides the necessary layered technical controls throughout the environment network, host, container, code, data to ensure resilience and contain potential breaches, even if an individual ZTA check fails or a layer is somehow bypassed. It's the how is that access path secured? How is the resource itself hardened? How is lateral movement prevented?
So ZTA sets the rules for entry and movement based on verified identity and real-time context.
Right.
And DD makes sure that the paths, the systems, the services, and the data themselves have multiple overlapping defenses, making the whole system much, much harder to comprehensively. It's not ZTA or DD, it's CTA and D.
Exactly. You absolutely need both working together. Effective security in today's dynamic distributed world isn't about building one single strong wall anymore. It requires this adaptive, layered approach that starts with identity, assumes threats will get in, verifies everything everywhere, and builds resilience at every level.
That's a powerful way to frame it.
Yeah.
So wrapping up, what does all this mean for you, our listener, who's actually building or securing these cloud-native systems?
Well, I think it means recognizing that you really have to move beyond that old perimeter thinking. Security needs to be woven in from the start, built in, not bolted on. It has to start with strong identity management. It needs to be applied in layers everywhere, cloud, cluster, container, code. And it has to be continuously verified and validated. It's definitely a shift in architecture, but also very much a shift in mindset.
A shift in mindset that leads perfectly into our final thought. We like to leave you with something provocative to chew on. So how about this? How does that assume breach principle, which is so core to zero trust, fundamentally change the day-to-day job of security operations teams? How does it shift their focus from just trying to block attackers at the perimeter to actively hunting for and containing threats that might already be inside the architecture?
That's a great question. That pivot from only prevention to prioritizing detection and response. While it requires different skills, different tools focusing on visibility inside the environment, and frankly, a constant state of vigilance, it's about assuming you're already in a fight.
Indeed. Something to think about. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into securing cloud-native and microservices architectures with zero trust and defense in depth.
Yeah, it's a complex area, but absolutely critical for anyone building or operating systems today. Hope it was useful.
Definitely. Stay tuned for future deep dives into the world of architecture by subscribing to The Joy of Architecture.